I would like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, AWS Shield, Protecting Web Applications from DDoS Attacks. Our presenter for today is Venkat Vijayaragathan. Venkat is the Senior Product Manager for AWS Shield. He has been with AWS since 2010 as Product Manager for Amazon CloudFront and AWS WAF. And for the last year, he has been leading product management efforts building AWS Shield. Our subject matter experts answering Q&A throughout the presentation include Andrew Thomas, who is Director of Software Development for AWS Shield, Richard Freed, Software Development Manager for AWS Shield, and we also have Nate Dye, Development Manager for AWS WAF, and Jeffrey Lyon, AWS DDoS Response Team Manager. And with that, we will now kick off today's presentation, and I'll pass the mic on to Venkat.
Thanks, Nicole. Welcome, everyone, to today's session on AWS Shield Managed DDoS Protection Service. In this session today, we'll talk about or give an introduction to AWS Shield. But before we do that, we'll also take a quick look at what AWS has been doing with the DDoS protection over the years. Before we get to that, let's quickly look at what is DDoS. For some of you who might not be familiar with that subject, DDoS, as you might know, is a distributed denial of service attack. These are attacks that bad actors or hackers try to generate on your web application, try to overwhelm your web servers, making it unavailable for your real users. So ultimately, DDoS attacks are availability risk for your web applications. Now, when talking about large volume of traffic, the traffic could be on different layers. It could be volumetric DDoS attacks, which congest the network pipes between your end users and your application. These could be attacks like UDP or reflection attacks. Attacks could also be state exhaustion attacks, which try to use the connection tables and exhaust these connections available to make to real users. And lastly, and there are more sophisticated DDoS attacks, like application layer DDoS attacks. These look like very well-formed HTTP requests, and attacks are HTTP GET requests or POST floods or even DNS query floods. In terms of which of these attacks are popular and how these are distributed, large volume of DDoS attacks are volumetric, and one of the most common attacks there is SSDP or reflection attacks, which are very easy to generate, and we see that very commonly occurring. Even though these are very easy to generate, they also consume a lot of bandwidth and clog the pipes between your applications and your end users. The other types of volumetric attacks that are also common are attacks like NTP reflection attacks or DNS reflection attacks. And Chargan reflection is one of the more recent types of attacks that has been prevalent in the recent days. The second type of attack, which is less prevalent, occurring 20% of the times, are SYN floods. And these can look like real connection attempts, but they are not really real connections, because when we try to make the connections and send a SYN cookie back, we don't get the SYN cookie back to web servers. So we know those are malicious SYN floods. And last type of DDoS attacks occur at the application layer. And one of the most common types of application layer attacks occur on the DNS layer. And these are DNS query floods. And these typically last for a long period of time and exhaust your DNS resources on a DNS server. And other types of attacks that are also common among application layer are HTTP GET floods or other slow read attacks. Now that we looked at the types of DDoS attacks, let's look at what are the challenges that we have heard from customers that they said that they face in mitigating DDoS attacks. The First one that we often hear is that DDoS attacks are difficult to enable, or rather DDoS mitigations are difficult to enable. Often customers, when they want to enable DDoS protection on their own data centers, they have to build their own scrubbing devices or provision their own bandwidth on their own data centers, which is often cumbersome. And other customers tell us that often when to deploy a mitigation system, they have to re-architect their application just to enable some of the common protections against DDoS. All of these are undifferentiated heavy lifting that customers don't want to do. Second type of challenge that we've often heard is manual involvement during an attack. Some of the solutions that you might be familiar with require you to engage the solution providers during an attack so that the solution provider could route the traffic to distant scrubbing locations to filter off bad traffic and let only the good traffic through to your web application. Now, what this means is that while the time your team and your security operations team engages the solutions provider, there's a delay, and that increases the time to mitigate the attack. And during that time, your applications might be unavailable for your real users. The third type of challenge that we hear from customers is this rerouting that solutions providers often implement increases latency for users and increases latency for real users, which is just a side effect of DDoS mitigation that customers don't like often. And then, of course, there are providers that there are mitigation systems that are effective, but they are very expensive to use. And customers often don't want to spend huge sum of money to enable DDoS protection for their applications. So these are the challenges. Now let's see what is the AWS approach to DDoS protection. Now, across AWS and across Amazon, we've always had DDoS protections. And since the beginning, we've always had DDoS protections enabled. And we did that largely to make sure that AWS services are highly available. We didn't want our customers to be worried about building or managing DDoS attacks and doing the undifferentiated heavy lifting just because they wanted to enable some common protections against DDoS attacks. And we wanted to take that burden off those customers and do it for them. And that's why DDoS protections on AWS have always been built into the AWS global infrastructure. What this means is that DDoS protections are transparent to AWS and to AWS services. So if you are using AWS services today to run your web applications, you're already getting some of these DDoS protections, or you always got these DDoS protections. And the second thing that we always ensure is that the DDoS protections that we built into AWS are always on, meaning our detection systems are always looking at the incoming traffic, looking for malicious and suspicious activity. And the mitigation systems are automatically enabled, and they are inline, making it efficient because there is no external routing happening to a faraway scrubbing location. This ensures that our customers are able to get the best latency even during DDoS attack. And lastly, just by the nature of being a cloud provider, AWS data centers often have redundant internet connectivity across all our data centers and AWS edge locations worldwide. This internet connectivity allows us to scale during a DDoS attack and scale, and we have the bandwidth and scrubbing capacity to provide that scale. So as I said, DDoS protection has been built into AWS that protects AWS services like CloudFront, Route 53, ELB, or even other properties of Amazon like Amazon.com. And these protections that we've always had protect against some of the most common infrastructure layer attacks. And these are attacks like SYN floods or ACK floods and UDP floods. And all of these protections are available to you at no additional cost, which are just built in and you get it when you use AWS services. But even though we had these protections and we've even had white papers that discuss these protections, customers still keep asking us or kept asking us a lot of questions. One of the most popular questions is, does AWS protect me from DDoS attacks? Because they were unsure that AWS did something in this area. And few other customers also had questions about whether AWS protected them from large DDoS attacks and more sophisticated DDoS attacks. And customers also wanted to access DDoS experts during an attack. Other customers, mostly in banking and financial services sector, also asked for visibility into attacks. And there are several other capabilities customers wanted. And that's why we launched AWS Shield. AWS Shield is a managed DDoS protection service. And it comes in two flavors. The standard protection, as you all know, is available to all AWS customers at no additional cost. It is built into AWS services, and you get that just by using AWS. The second tier of protection is the advanced protection. That is a paid service that you can optionally subscribe to that provides additional comprehensive protections from large and sophisticated DDoS attacks. Let's look at what each of these tiers of service offers. Let's look at Shield Standard first. AWS Shield Standard is very similar to the type of protections that AWS has always been providing to you all these years. AWS Shield Standard protects against some of the most common DDoS attacks, like SYN floods and reflection attacks. You can think of Shield Standard or the most common attacks as protecting against some of the most frequently occurring, or 96% of the DDoS attacks that we typically see are protected by Shield Standard. And these 96% of the DDoS attacks at the layer 3 and 4 are automatically detected and mitigated right at the AWS border of the network, so that you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is simply use AWS services and architect your applications using the best practices white paper that we've already published. Now, these are layer 3 and 4 protections, that is the infrastructure layer protections. Now, if you think that your applications are vulnerable to more sophisticated layer 7 DDoS attacks, AWS also provides the AWS WAF, or the Web Application Firewall, which you can use for layer 7 DDoS attack mitigation. AWS WAF is a highly customizable and highly flexible layer 7 traffic filtering engine that is available for you completely self-service and pay as you go. So you can create any type of rule on AWS WAF that looks at any part of the incoming request and drop those requests or block those requests before they reach your web application. Now, if you want to configure AWS WAF for layer 7 protections, there are different options. You can use the quick pre-configured protections that AWS WAF has made available using the security automations templates. So you can simply select the actual protections that you want to enable and then just deploy them. And within minutes, you can get started with those protections. Or for customers who want to customize the protections for their own applications, AWS WAF also enables more advanced automated security, which you can enable and which would use AWS WAF in conjunction with logs and backend log processing and dynamically write new WAF rules, blocking bad actors before they hit your application. And Throughout this year, we have made these templates and for pre-configured protections and automated security available to you so that you can get started with some of these really quickly and customize these for your own applications. Now, just to give you a better sense of what Shield Standard provides with respect to what AWS already did, AWS Shield Standard provides better protection than ever for your applications running on AWS. Now, a lot of that is because of the proprietary Blackwatch systems that we have developed in-house. So that is very tailored to AWS environment and integrated with the AWS environment, giving us the flexibility to give you robust mitigations for infrastructure layer attacks. With Shield Standard, we are more committed than before in continuing to provide you improved detection and mitigation for these types of attacks by giving additional mitigation capacity and continuing to add additional scrubbing capacity in all our AWS data centers. And all of this we want to continue doing at no additional cost. So you get these, and you will continue to get these just by using AWS services. So that was Shield Standard. Now let's move on to Shield Advanced and dive deep into what are the specific capabilities Shield Advanced provides. Before that, let's talk about the key pillars that Shield Advanced has been built on top of. And one of the things that we wanted to be sure of is we adhere to the same principles that AWS DDoS mitigation has been built on, which is the AWS integration. Shield Advanced is tightly integrated with AWS so that you can get these advanced protections without making any changes to your infrastructure. You don't have to make any changes to your DNS configurations or add a new layer to your applications. Shield Advanced protections are transparent, and all you have to do is simply point and click at the resources that you want to enable protections on. And just like we saw earlier, Shield Advanced has always-on detection and mitigation that gives you quick detection of attacks or suspicious activity, and inline mitigation ensures that we are able to mitigate the attacks very quickly without impact to your applications and without impact to latency for your real users. And we also wanted to solve the problems that customers had with cost by making Shield Advanced affordable, and also ensuring that during a DDoS attack, you don't pay for additional scaling of AWS services due to DDoS attack. And lastly, we want to make Shield Advanced highly flexible, giving you the capabilities and tools to customize protections for your own applications. With that, we talked about AWS integration. Shield Advanced is available today, is available generally available for everybody, and available on these 4 AWS services. It's on application load balancers, classic load balancers, Amazon CloudFront, and Amazon Route 53. So you can enable each of these or any of these AWS resources and simply point at them and click to activate advanced protection. Okay, now let's talk about specific capabilities that Shield Advanced provides. Shield Advanced provides 5 capabilities that you want to talk to you about today. There is always-on monitoring and detection. There is advanced protection at all layers. Attack notification and reporting so that you know when attacks happen and what type of attacks happen. Then there is access to DDoS Response Team so that you can get additional help to mitigate DDoS attacks and also get help for best practices and analysis of DDoS attacks. And lastly, Shield Advanced also offers build protection to make sure you don't incur any scaling costs because you had to scale AWS services due to DDoS attack. You want to ensure that you don't incur any other additional cost due to a large or small DDoS attack. Okay, let's look at each one of these. Let's start with always-on monitoring and detection. Shield Pro does always-on monitoring and detection by monitoring the network flow traffic as well as the application traffic. And at both these layers, the monitoring is always on, looking for suspicious activities. And in order to look for suspicious activities, we use a number of different techniques. We use signature-based detections, which are common known bad signatures that we know are definitely malicious and shouldn't be hitting your applications at all. So this is one of the simple techniques that we use to just drop packets before they reach your applications. But we also use more advanced techniques like those based on heuristics. Heuristics-based anomaly detection uses some of the learnings that we have had over the past years, identifying known bad IPs and networks or traffic levels across different geographies and other validated sources. And based on these heuristics that we have collected, we detect anomalies from these heuristics. And when there is an anomaly, we call that suspicious and provide notifications. And the last type of technique that we use is baselining, where for your application traffic, for each one of your applications that you have enabled DDoS protection on, you found baselines of the traffic hitting your applications. And this baselining happens continuously so that we know what the normal traffic looks like. And we form baselines on a number of dimensions like HTTP requests per second or source IP addresses, URLs, and user agents. And when there are deviations from these baselines or normal patterns, we identify them as suspicious and provide notifications and take actions on it. Okay, so that was always on monitoring and detection. Now, let's talk about actual mitigations or protections. Shield provides mitigations or protections across all layers. And let's categorize these layers into layer 3 and 4, or the infrastructure protections, or layer 7, application protections. Let's look at each one of these. Let's start with layer 3 and 4. What do we do here for protections? There are several mitigation techniques we use for layer 3 and 4 infrastructure attack mitigation. First, we use deterministic filtering. This is one of the simplest filtering mechanisms or mitigation mechanisms that we use, where we simply do a basic hygiene check by dropping malformed TCP packets before they hit your application. We look for valid TCP flags or IP checksum, UDP payload length, etc. For example, CloudFront is a TCP or HTTP based service, so CloudFront shouldn't receive any UDP traffic at all. So it's naturally easy for us to filter out any UDP traffic. So we just drop those packets right before it reaches AWS services like CloudFront or even ELB. The second type of technique that we use is called traffic prioritization based on scoring. So we use a number of different attributes, and a lot of those attributes are things that we collect from our detection systems. And we use those attributes to score every incoming packet that comes to your applications or comes to your AWS services. And we use those score to take actions. And we assign low suspicion scores or high suspicion scores based on the attributes that we use. And all the scoring and inspection happens inline. What this allows us to do is we can now discard the low priority traffic and keep the traffic that we are highly confident of and let it through. What this means is that the DDoS mitigation system that we have is not black and white. What this lets us do is allows us to remove false positives and still provide you the best mitigation for your applications or for your infrastructure traffic. And when required, we can be aggressive and start dropping packets with medium to high suspicion score. And when we don't need to be aggressive, we just block the packets with high suspicion score. And the third technique that we use is the advanced routing policies. As we talked about earlier, AWS has a large network of data centers and AWS edge locations. Now, during an attack, we use this large network of scrubbing and bandwidth capacity, which is available in each of our data centers worldwide and edge locations worldwide. And we use that to provide or bring in additional mitigation capacity inline to mitigate large and more sophisticated DDoS attacks. Now, all these routing policies or most of these routing policies are automatically enabled when a DDoS attack is detected. So the attack mitigation happens really quickly. And in some occasions, we also have the ability to apply routing policies using manual traffic engineering driven by our DDoS response team, who proactively jump on any attacks that are not automatically mitigated. Okay, so now that we saw layer 3 and 4 mitigations, let's talk about layer 7 or the application protections. So we looked at AWS WAF before. So along with Shield Standard, you could use AWS WAF or the Web Application Firewall to build your own layer 7 protections. As we talked about earlier, AWS WAF is a highly flexible traffic filtering engine that allows you to write customized rules to block any type of malicious requests, and also provides monitoring and visibility that lets you continuously tune your rules that you write on AWS WAF. With Shield, AWS WAF is tightly integrated, and we use the same platform to provide the layer 7 DDoS attack mitigation. Now, what's different with Shield Advanced is how you use AWS WAF. There are 3 modes of operation to use AWS WAF with Shield Advanced. You can continue using AWS WAF self-service. That means you can write your own rules that are highly customized to your own applications, which is often required for some of the more sophisticated application layer attacks. But with Shield Advanced, you get AWS WAF included at no additional cost. So you don't pay for the request fees that AWS WAF would typically charge, or rule fees, or the web ACL fees. All of that is included with Shield Advanced. So you can write your own rules, and Shield Advanced takes care of the costs incurred. Now, yes, of course you can write your own rules, but often you might not know what rules to write in the crunch of the situation. So in those cases, you can engage DDoS response team or the DDoS experts. And DDoS experts will help triage the DDoS attack and analyze them, find the root cause, and assist you in creating an AWS WAF rule that would mitigate the attack. And the last type of engagement is for some of these DDoS attacks at layer 7, DDoS response team will proactively jump on the attacks and start analyzing the attacks and triaging the attack and find the root cause and create AWS WAF rules, and with your authorization, we'll apply those or push those to production to mitigate the ongoing attack. Now, you can give AWS DDoS response team access or permissions to your AWS WAF configurations via IAM, and we have a cloud permission template that you can use to very quickly give those permissions. we do recommend that you give those permissions to DRT so that during an attack, we are discussing how to mitigate the attack and whether or not the root cause that we identified is the right root cause, or whether or not the rules are appropriate, instead of discussing how to give DRT IAM permissions. So that was the layer 7 attack protection, or comprehensive protection across all layers. Now let's move on to the attack notification and reporting. AWS Shield Advanced provides notifications of attacks. It also tells you how big the attacks were, what type of attacks they were, and for all of these types of attacks, you get notifications via Amazon CloudWatch. And you can alarm on those and engage your own teams, and subsequently also engage AWS DDoS Response Team if you want to. And all these attack notifications and metrics and details of the attacks are also available on a historical basis. So you can go to the Shield console and look at a historical summary of all the attacks that you have got in the past. Okay, let's move on to the DDoS Response Team. That's another capability that a lot of our customers keep saying they value a lot. Now, we saw that DDoS Response Team can respond to DDoS attacks either reactively when you engage them or proactively for severe DDoS attacks. But what DDoS Response Team also does is, or you can engage DDoS Response Team not only during the attack, but you can also engage them before the attack or after the attack. So you can engage DDoS Response Team before the attack to get proactive consultation or any other best practice guidance, as DDoS Response Team is highly knowledgeable about mitigating DDoS attacks, especially in the AWS environment. So they are familiar with AWS services, and DDoS Response Team can guide you by providing best practices for DDoS resiliency on AWS. And of course, we talked about engaging during the attack. DDoS Response Team proactively jumps on all layer 3 and 4 DDoS attacks, which is completely managed by AWS. For layer 7 DDoS attacks, you can engage DDoS Response Team, or for some of the more severe DDoS attacks, DDoS Response Team proactively engages for layer 7 DDoS attacks as well. You can also engage DDoS Response Team after the attack. A lot of customers keep telling us that they need additional details about the attack or want to do a post-attack analysis. And DDoS Response Team can help customers with those type of analysis, where they can provide assistance, getting additional details, or providing additional rules that best practices that customers should implement in order to mitigate such attacks more easily in future. So you can engage DDoS Response Team for that as well. The last capability that I want to talk to you today is bill protection. So bill protection is often a feature that's very useful for layer 7 DDoS attacks. Sometimes during a layer 7 DDoS attacks, you might have to scale your AWS services and your application to absorb the DDoS attack, because there will be occasions when for DDoS attacks, absorption or absorbing the DDoS attack is a perfectly viable mitigation tactic that you can use. And for those instances, AWS Shield Advanced absorbs the cost of scaling of any of these services like CloudFront, ELB, or application load balancers, or Route 53, so that you don't incur any cost due to a DDoS attack. We wanted to make sure that DDoS attack itself does not be a economic risk for you. So you can simply request a concession by reaching out to AWS, and we will investigate that and provide you the necessary concessions. Okay, now that we looked at all the different capabilities, let's also talk about how you get started. And once we look at how we get started, we'll also do a quick demo of how you can enable AWS Shield Advanced. So when talking about how you get started, the first question customers usually ask is, how much does it cost? So as we talked about earlier, the standard protection is available at no additional cost. It's just built into AWS services. You just get that just by using AWS services. And of course, to use AWS services, there is no commitment. So there is no commitment to get standard protection. The advanced protection is a paid service. We do require that you subscribe to advanced protection for 1 year and provide us a commitment for that. Advanced protection has two dimensions of fees. The first one is a monthly fee, which is a $3,000 fee. That's a recurring fee for every month. And with that fee, that's a fee that's per customer. So what that lets you do is once you subscribe your account for DDoS protection, you can add multiple resources to DDoS protection or enable DDoS protection on multiple resources. And these resources could live on another AWS account or your own AWS account as long as you own those resources and have cross-account IAM permissions to describe those resources in other accounts. And these resources, as we looked at earlier, could be a CloudFront distribution or a ELB or a Route 53 hosted zone. And depending on which resource you enable, there is also an additional fee on data transfer out of that particular resource. For example, if you enabled DDoS protection on your CloudFront distribution, there will be a fee of 2.5 cents per gigabyte of data transfer out of CloudFront. And that data transfer price is tiered, so you get discounted data transfer price as you have higher volume of data transfer out of CloudFront. And that fee is in addition to what you might be paying CloudFront. Again, if you enable DDoS protection on ELB, there's a fee of 5 cents per gigabyte on data transfer out of ELB. And when I say ELB, that includes ELB or ALB. And again, that fee is in addition to what you might pay for data transfer out of ELB. And there is no fee for usage, or there is no usage-based fee for enabling DDoS protection on Route 53. Now, the other question that often comes up on how you get started is, which is the right tier for me? So, as we talked about earlier, standard protection provides protection from some of the most common DDoS attacks. Now, if you think that you are okay with some of the common protections, either because you are in your applications or you operate in an industry that are not prone to DDoS attacks, or you are at a stage of your application lifecycle or product lifecycle that doesn't need sophisticated DDoS protections, and you're comfortable using the AWS white paper and tools and techniques that we provide to build resilient architecture, then you can definitely use AWS standard protections, and that should protect you from some of the most frequently occurring DDoS attacks, and more specifically, protect you from 96% of the DDoS attacks that a typical website sees. Now, for some of you who are in some industries that are prone to DDoS attacks, or some of the industries that are more vulnerable to DDoS, more sophisticated DDoS attacks could use advanced protection from large and sophisticated DDoS attacks. Now, you might also have requirements that are regulatory in nature to provide visibility to your customers when there is an attack. This typically happens in banking and financial services, where customers have to provide reports on the types of attacks that they've got and how many attacks they've got. So for that type of customers, you can enable advanced protection, and advanced protection is probably right for you. In terms of how you actually enable these tiers of service, let's look at that. Now, as we talked about earlier, standard protection is already enabled for you. If you're using these services on AWS, you're automatically getting it now. So you don't have to do anything. It's just built in. For advanced protection, now this is what you can enable right from AWS Management Console, even though there is a subscription commitment. This is something that you can enable on the console yourself and add protections for your resources. Now let's do a quick demo of how to enable advanced protection and navigate to our console, and let's see how you can do that. Okay. I'm assuming you're all able to see my screen here. Okay, perfect. Okay, now let's look at the console. This is the AWS Management Console. Now, I have two accounts today. One of them is enabled for Shield, and other one I have some data already populated that our team helped us with to show you how the reports look like. Now, in order to navigate to the Shield console, first thing that I want to tell here is that AWS WAF and Shield are tightly integrated, and that's why we've also integrated the console. So first thing you want to do is navigate to the WAF and Shield console. Now, I have my personal account that has not previously used AWS WAF or Shield. So this is the first run experience that you would have if you have not used AWS WAF or Shield before. So as this says, there are two parts of this console. There is AWS WAF and Shield. You navigate to the same console for both. For now, let's go to the Shield console. Now, as we see on the left navigation, the top section addresses AWS WAF, and you can go there and create your own AWS WAF rules, and that is completely self-service and pay as you go. Now, if you're interested in Shield, here is the Shield section. Here we show both the Shield Standard and Advanced. This is something we wanted to show so that you can make an educated decision whether Shield Standard is right for you or whether you want to opt for Shield Advanced. So let's say that you want to go ahead with Shield Advanced. Now, here is how you would activate AWS Shield Advanced. Now, as Shield Advanced is not typical of AWS services because Shield Advanced requires a 12-month commitment. We want to confirm with you that you indeed intended to sign up for this service. So you can review this and review the pricing as well and say you agree and activate DDoS protection. Now, because this is my personal account, I'm not going to activate it here. Instead, I'm going to move to a different account where Shield is already activated. I'm going to navigate to the same console and go to Shield section. So as we see here, I already activated Shield, and what I'm going to do is add DDoS protection. So what adding DDoS protection means is that once you subscribe your account, as I talked about earlier, you still need to add protection or specify the resources on which you want to enable protection. not all, you don't have to enable all your resources under the account for protection. You might have some resources that are, say, for example, for dev environments or some for prod. So maybe you decide you don't want to enable Shield Advanced for your dev environment, but you might want to do that for your prod environment. So let's say that I want to enable DDoS protection on my application load balancer. So I select the resource type as ALB, and I select a region as North Virginia. So as we see earlier, AWS resources shows up here. These are the resources that are available on that particular region. And I can name my own protection here just for quick access, or I'm going to say ALB protection. And I can use the same name for other protections. Or I can even select CloudFront as a protection. So I could select CloudFront as a distribution on CloudFront and enable protection on that. And I can choose to, so the network visibility for CloudFront protection is on by default. And the web visibility is also on by default. The only thing that we want you to do to enable web visibility is enable the web ACLs for that particular CloudFront distribution. What this allows us to do is this allows us to start monitoring your application traffic. Even if you didn't have any rules on your AWS WAF, we can still monitor your traffic and start enabling protections on it. Now, I have this particular distribution already enabled for protection. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. And once you enable protection, this is how it's going to show up. So you see my protection that I just added, it's already enabled for protection. And you see that the network visibility is enabled across all layers, and the web attack visibility and mitigations are also enabled. Now, similarly, I can add other resources for protection by simply choosing to add more protections. Now, in this dashboard, you see the summary of protected resources. This shows all your resources or the number of resources that you have enabled for protection. And if you add an ongoing incident, that also shows up here on the dashboard. Now, currently, I don't have any incidents, but let's see what it would look like on the incidents page. So if I had any current incidents ongoing, it would show up at the top and list the specific distributions or ALBs or ELBs or hosted zones that is currently under attack, and so that you know where you want to take action on. Now in this case, but I have a lot of historical incidents. So looks like on this application load balancer, I had SynFlood mitigation or attack, and I can navigate to the CloudWatch console that shows me the actual metric or graph that tells me that I had an attack that was 7.25 gigs in size. And as we see, you can also, of course, as you might be aware of CloudWatch, you can also set alarms on CloudWatch and take necessary actions. Similarly, for this particular attack, there's a multi-vector attack, so it also shows other attack vectors, and you can click through to go to the CloudWatch console to get more details. And on this dashboard, on the historical report, it also shows you what the status was, as these attacks are typically automatically mitigated. The status says mitigated, and this also shows the incident start time and the attack duration. So this is how it's going to look like when you enable protection. Okay, that was the quick demo. And let's move on to the presentation now. I think, so now that we looked at standard and advanced protection, and also the demo, I think that was the last thing we had for the day.